Welcome to the chosen ones. If you believe burying someone would kill them, make sure they weren't a seed, since this is what they didn't anticipate. Your solitude was their worst mistake. They didn't just push you away. They gave you over to destiny on a silver platter. They hailed your purported demise. Heaven was creating the narrative surprise they'd never recover from, as if it were the season finale of a petty comedy. Let us be honest. The plan was obvious. Cut you off, disparage you, and make you feel unwanted, unimportant, or invisible. They believed that cutting off your connection would deprive you of power. Instead of breaking down, you broke through. And now they aren't simply watching you climb. They're choked by the repercussions of their own treachery. They are suffocated by something other than remorse. It's incontrovertible proof that you didn't need them at all. This is a fact. Psychology. According to Google research, social rejection triggers the same neural pathways as physical pain. But here's the twist they didn't plan for. When someone's grief drives them to find purpose, the shift is irrevocable. And, honey, your glow-up is giving them spiritual asthma. So buckle in. This is not only a narrative about loneliness. This is how exile became elevation, how quiet became your blade, and how those who fled are now creeping back, yearning for the air you carry. And let's be honest, they believed that cutting you off would ruin you. It turns out they basically provided the selected one some unbroken tranquility and a strong enough Wi-Fi connection to download divine strategy. Let's get to it. Number 1, they mistaken your banishment for the end. But this was a holy incubation. They mistaken your banishment for the end. But all it did was wake them up, something they were never prepared for. They were confident in their position when they pushed you away. They believed that shutting you off would deny you access to life, pleasure, and advancement. They imagined their absence would be the last nail in your coffin. But it seems out they didn't understand how picked ones work. They were unaware that when life closes one door, fate unlocks a whole other world. They believed they had finished your narrative. However, what they actually did was put you into the most powerful stage of your process, incubation, while they sat comfortably in their cliques and circles. You were being created in quiet. The exact solitude they weaponized became a hallowed sanctuary in which your knowledge grew, your vision developed, and your resistance hardened into something unbreakable. The same individuals who looked down on you were inadvertently putting you into a spiritual greenhouse, much like a seed buried in soil. You were not dead. You were concealed. The divine watered you. No spotlight, no applause, and no phony support. It's just you and God. And while they mistaken your quiet season for defeat, you were laying foundations that they couldn't see. Deep roots, true strength, and silent might. They expected you to return begging, yet you came back. Transformed. Stronger, sharper, more focused. Not bitter, but wise. They are now confused. How could someone they felt was beneath them return with more elegance, power, and clarity than before? That is the part that is burning them right now, since your return is unmistakable, not loud. They attempted to bury a soul that was divinely predestined for resurrection. And now they're forced to watch you blossom in areas they never imagined you'd reach without them. They believed that banishment would be your end, but it was merely the beginning. And now they're trapped watching the glow up. They attempted to stop, only to realize too late that what they had pushed away was exactly what they needed to live. Number 2, isolation did not break you. It became clear that you were the basis all along. When someone cuts you off, they anticipated your whole life to fall apart. In their thoughts, you were the one who relied on them. You were the one who benefited from the relationship. They assumed that the minute they retreated, you would collapse. But they didn't understand you weren't clinging to them. They clung to you the whole time. You weren't simply another member of the gang. You were the glue that held everything together. The fissures appeared as soon as they removed you. They believed you were the dependent one. But now they realized the reality. They were feasting on your power, knowledge, and brightness. Without you, the vibe changed. The chats became void. The plans stopped pouring. The chuckles were quieter because, although they believed they were the main act, you were the one carrying the show from backstage. And now that you've left, the whole building is swaying. You didn't collapse since you never stood on them in the first place. They were standing on you. You were the source of harmony, direction, and depth. You were the one who quietly held space, shown grace, offered truth, and created peace while others took it for granted. Friendship, relationships, and teamwork. Your presence made it seem alive. They only recognize it now because it has died without you. That's the awful fact they're dealing with. You weren't outspoken about your worth. You did not beg to be seen. But after you were gone, your absence spoke more than any words could. They're recognizing now that they've lost more than just one individual. They lost the essential basis that held the entire thing up. And the most difficult thing for them. You are prospering without them. You didn't just survive. You've risen. You're clearer, calmer, more focused, and maybe even more powerful. They expected you to shatter when they cut you off. Yet all it did was release you from the burden of carrying people who had no idea you were their anchor. They are now left to strive to reproduce the tranquility, vigor, and clarity you simply provided. And they cannot because you were never replaceable. You were the root. And without you, nothing they create will ever seem solid again. Third, they weaponized abandonment. But you transformed it into hallowed solitude. They did not just walk away from you. They purposely left to wreak harm. The fact is that their purpose was not only to remove themselves. They intended for their absence to harm you. They wanted you to feel useless, bewildered, and abandoned. It was not silence. It was a strategy, a deliberate maneuver intended to make you doubt your value and lose your equilibrium. But they didn't realize that selected ones don't come apart in solitude. They develop. They wanted you to feel punished. They wanted you to sit alone, feeling undesired. Instead, you sat with yourself and realized everything they were attempting to keep you from. You began to realize that tranquility does not exist in the presence of humans. It exists in the presence of truth. In that seclusion, truth emerged. It informed you that their absence did not define you. It exposed them. They expected pulling away to take something from you, but instead exposed everything about them. It demonstrated their immaturity, insecurity, and craving for control. They weren't expecting the version of you that would emerge from the stillness they left you in, where the loneliness they intended as punishment became your shelter. You started to appreciate your strength, hone your judgment, and regain aspects of yourself that had been buried underneath the havoc they caused. You stopped waiting for them to return and began strolling into rooms you never imagined you belonged in. They no longer know how to contact you since the version of you they left behind has vanished. You are not bitter. You are not furious. You are simply free. Nothing frightens them more than the knowledge that their effort to destroy you merely given you the opportunity to become someone they can no longer influence, control, or access. They weaponized abandonment. You converted it into restoration. That is the true story twist. Number 4, their circle became an echo chamber. However, you discovered the frequency of truth when they shut you off. They believed that surrounding themselves with like-minded individuals would be sufficient to keep their world intact. They established tight and noisy groups, echo chambers filled with the same viewpoints, vacuous talks, and repeated thinking. They were not growing. They were only affirming each other's egos. Nobody challenged the group, so they felt comfortable. Anything except safe does not imply strength, and loud does not indicate wisdom. In contrast, you were obliged to remain silent. You did not get lost in the stillness, however. You tuned in when they were busy agreeing with each other in order to feel superior. You were sitting alone, listening to a deeper voice. You began to pick up on frequencies that could not be heard in busy environments. You weren't speaking to blend in. You were obtaining insight on how to break free. This seclusion transformed your inner world into a signal tower. And now you speak with conviction. You speak with essence. Your words mean something. They never developed substance. Their chats have continued to revolve around the same trite issues. They gossip. They imitate. They keep repeating the same slogans, without altering anything about themselves. It's all about being seen, being correct, and having power. But you are speaking from experience, healing, and depth. You did not just read it. You experienced it, and it shows. They believed that numbers equaled power, and that the louder the room, the stronger the voice. But you discovered power in resonance, not loudness. You are not attempting to impress. You are here to make an impact. That is why your words are more powerful, your energy is stronger, and your presence talks louder than your voice. They now listen silently, whether they confess it or not. They repeat your remarks in their heads since it was the first time they questioned their loudness. They are well aware of this. While they repeated one other in rounds, you were honed into a voice capable of breaking cycles. Number 5, they deprive you of love just to learn that you don't thrive on approbation. They believed withdrawing their adoration would shatter you. They imagined that their quiet, remoteness, and coldness would drive you to despair. They were expecting you to rush back and attempt to reclaim their warmth. But this is what they didn't expect. You were not starved for their attention. You had outgrown the leftovers they offered you in the first place. They provided just enough to keep you hanging on. A little affirmation here and a half-hearted compliment there. Perhaps a moment of compassion when it suited them. But it was never really nourishing. It was about control. It was a kind of manipulation masquerading as love. They wanted you to rely on those little emotional breadcrumbs, just enough to keep you emotionally hungry but never satisfied. They removed their devotion. They expected you to fall apart. Instead, something tremendous occurred. You awoke and discovered you were not weak. You were just emotionally famished. And once you stopped focusing on their inconsistencies, you discovered what true calm feels like. You realized that love did not feel like perplexity. Affection does not impose restrictions, and connection does not compel you to shrink. Their absence did not weaken you. It revealed the truth. You were always complete, to survive on fragments. You were not desperate for their energy. You were just oblivious of how much energy they were taking from you. They are now stunned. They're observing your light. Continue on and remain grounded without ever looking back. And it's bothering them because they believe they were the winner. They believe their retention was the prize. However, the true pleasure came when you stopped desiring them and began to connect with yourself. They mistook your quiet for weakness, but it was self-respect. They misunderstood your calm for sadness, but it was therapeutic. You were not waiting for affection. You were waiting for alignment. And once you've experienced genuine connection with yourself, God, and truth, there's no going back to crumbs. You've increased your hunger. You have upped your standard, and they are no longer on the menu. Number 6, in their attempt to cancel you, they inadvertently archived your own relevancy. They really believed that leaving you out would cause you to vanish. They believed that if they stopped mentioning your name and withdrew you from the group, the tale would continue as if you had never been. It was subtle at first, uninviting you to events and removing you from talks, as if your contributions never occurred. They sought to diminish your power by pretending you were never a significant part of the tale. But here's the catch. They didn't realize you were the tale. The aim was to drown you out with quiet, to consider you as a phase that finished, a mistake that passed, a voice they outgrew. However, in doing so, they just succeeded to deprive their environment of the same substance that provided purpose. Because, while they tried to pretend you didn't matter, they were gradually making themselves irrelevant. You weren't just passing through their life. You were the reason everything had depth, movement, and meaning. You were the one that sparked thoughts, keeping everything grounded. Challenge what needs to be challenged. Without you, the dynamic broke apart. The enthusiasm became stale. The circle deteriorated into a meaningless loop of repetition. They believed your absence would set them free. But now everything seems dry. Their interactions seem to be performance-based. Their talks were rehashed. They sense it deep within. They eliminated the sole individual who brought life to the room. They did not cancel you. They archived themselves. You continued to evolve and expand, taking steps toward truth and alignment. Meanwhile, they found themselves caught in the same old rut, attempting to preserve relevance in the absence of the soul that made it all worthwhile. And now, even if they attempted to write you back into the tale, they would be unable to do so because you have outgrown the page. You've moved on to a new volume. You are no longer a character. They are reading about you in a chapter that they can no longer access. They didn't just lose you. They squandered their opportunity for progress. They suppressed the one individual who could have added dimension to their trite plot. And now they're trapped repeating a story with no finale, transformation, or reality. Number 7. They forgot that solitude is heaven's preferred setting for revolt. They honestly believed that cutting you off would slow you down. They felt that isolating you would cause you to lose your footing, momentum, and maybe even your faith. But they didn't comprehend that heaven follows a pattern, and you were smack in the center of it. God has never required a multitude to prepare his chosen people. In reality, he enjoys a calm space. He accomplishes his most profound work in alone. And while they thought you were being punished, you were really being positioned. The hush they generated around you was not empty. It was a beautiful classroom. They did not forsake you despite the gap they created between you and the rest of the world. It eliminated the noise, allowing you to hear instructions at a higher frequency. You were not banished. You were summoned. You were dragged aside. Because what came next demanded concentration, not distraction. Revelation, not repetition. There is also a purpose, not popularity. They believed that by removing themselves from your life, you would miss out on chances. However, by attempting to impede your progress, they just created room for alignment. They unintentionally deleted everything that wasn't supposed to come with you. God utilized their rejection as divine collaboration because without their drama, views, and noise, you finally got the serenity to clearly perceive your task and confidently step into it. Now they're perplexed. They look at you and marvel how someone they had isolated ended up being exalted. They do not grasp this in the spiritual world. Isolation is not the same as exile. It's preparation, and the selected ones don't simply make it. They've rebuilt in it. They called it loneliness, but it was truly consecration. They called it rejection, but it was really refining. And the precise stillness they wanted to disrupt transformed into the environment in which heaven whispered your next instructions. They did not postpone your mission. They unintentionally ignited it. And now the elevation is public. However, the preparation was confidential. That's the thing they will never understand. They'd never punish you. They were situating you. Number 8, you were the lighthouse. They attempted to dim, but the fog revealed their own darkness. They assumed you were the issue. Too bright, honest, and constant. So they attempted to dull you gradually at first, using subtle jabs, deceptive words, and contemptuous attitudes. The purpose was straightforward: quiet, exclusion, and isolation. If they could simply lower your light, they'd feel like they're in the limelight. However, they failed to see that your light was not in competition. It was covering them. You weren't only shining for yourself. You were lighting up everything around you. Your presence made everything make sense. Your energy kept things in balance. Your wisdom helped me navigate the confusion, and your authenticity exposed the lies without me having to say anything. They did not want to rise. They simply wanted you to dim down so that their mediocrity would not be so obvious. But as soon as they pushed you out, the fog rolled in and everything hidden beneath the surface became visible. Chaos, gossip, insecurity, and manipulation. It all started to emerge. Because, without your light, there was nothing to hide behind. Your integrity had been concealing their insecurity. Your composure had been masking their drama. You were the glue they despised but sorely needed. Without you, the energy has changed. The people who attempted to outshine you are now exposed in their own confusion. The vibe in the group is off. The conversations lack depth. The unity they thought they had has shattered, and people are beginning to question why things only started falling apart after you left. And that is the sting. They cannot undo what has been revealed. Once your light revealed the truth, there was no turning back. Now they are sitting in their own darkness, realizing too late that you were not the distraction. You were the discernment. You were not the threat. You were the alignment. They lost more than just one person. They lost the one thing that prevented their dysfunction from being fully revealed. The fog has thickened, their flaws are visible, and your light continues to shine, but no longer for them. Number 9, their attempt to humble you exposed their own arrogance. They convinced themselves that you needed to be humbled, that you were becoming overconfident, self-assured, and full of yourself. But what they really meant was that you would no longer shrink for their comfort. You were standing in your truth, owning your growth, and walking in a power beyond their control. It made them uncomfortable, so they decided you should be taught a lesson. They attempted to clip your wings. They withdrew support. They distanced themselves. Some became silent. Others whispered behind closed doors. All of this was done with a calm smugness, as if they were on moral high ground and had been sent to drag you back down to earth. But what they didn't grasp was how arrogant it is to presume that someone else's confidence has to be corrected that they somehow had the right to determine how much light you should carry, and that they could humble anybody. The fact is that you were never arrogant. You were aware. You'd finally begun to see yourself clearly, and, for once, you did not apologize for it. And since they couldn't equal that clarity, they dubbed it pride because they lacked the same bravery. They called it revolt. They mistaken your grounded confidence for ego since it revealed what they didn't want to see in themselves, their own mediocrity. They didn't want to make you better. They were attempting to pull you down to a point where they felt secure again. However, all they ended up accomplishing was displaying their vulnerability. Their strategy to humble you revealed their inadequacy, desire to control, fear of being outgrown, and lack of self-awareness. Now they're left to watch you climb, unconcerned, unshaken, since you didn't need their approval. And the lesson they intended to impart backfired. Instead of humbling you, they embarrassed themselves, not via what they said or did, but by believing that your strength emanated from ego, when it really comes from understanding who you are. Number 10. They feared seclusion would crush your spirit, but it instead revived your vision. When someone cuts you off, they believed they were crushing your spirit. They imagined that withdrawing their presence, attention, and connection would leave you feeling confused, disoriented, and shattered. They assumed you'd plummeted without their approval. But they didn't comprehend that as they went, clarity arose. Their leaving did not damage you. It eliminated the noise. Suddenly, all of the voices you were attempting to appease became quiet. The weight of faking, continuously manipulating their views, and skirting their subtle disapproval. It was all lifted. You did not break apart in that silence. You discovered yourself. You began to see well, not what they were, but who you are. You realized how much energy you'd been investing into individuals who weren't reciprocating. You realized how much of your identity had been warped by their restricted perception of you. Without phony support networks and conditional affection, you started to build on the truth. You didn't need 10 viewpoints. You wanted one vision that was uniquely yours. And now that you have it, you are unstoppable. You recognize your value without waiting for others to validate it. You may see your route without asking permission to follow it. And it is what haunts them, because the version of you they rejected was still figuring things out. But the version that emerged from the quiet is locked in. They assumed that hurting your heart would obscure your goal. Instead, it cleansed the lens. You are not simply existing. You're moving with purpose. You're no longer second-guessing. They can sense it. They know they did not destroy you. They triggered something deeper inside you. They instill a sense of concentration and self-trust. They hoped you would never have access. They're perplexed now since they anticipated you to shrink. But you expanded. They feared seclusion would sap your soul. But all it did was remove the illusion that you would no longer be carrying the cloud of their thoughts. You've taken a big stride toward clarity. Even your history seems different with retrospect. What they intended to destroy you only created room for vision to resurface. And now you can see everything, even them, for what they really are. A number. They anticipated stillness to silence you, but it instead amplified your message. They believed that by being silent, ignoring you, and pretending you didn't exist, they could mute your voice. They assumed that if they stopped applauding, you would stop dancing. If people stopped talking about you, you would become irrelevant. They failed to grasp that you were never propelled by their cacophony in the first place. You were not speaking to be seen. You were living in harmony. And that type of truth does not need a microphone to capture the moment they attempted to silence you. Something significant occurred. You stopped trying to be heard and began living in a manner that could not be ignored. Your progress becomes a statement. Your peace became a protest. Your constancy became the whispering voice in settings when they believed you were no longer there. They attempted to quiet you, but your development began to speak volumes. And now, without even attempting, your life is revealing everything they attempted to conceal. They can't stop watching. They can't stop thinking about how someone they once disregarded is still rising, gleaming, and going forward with purpose. Because every step you take ahead, every objective you achieve, and every ounce of tranquility you carry confronts them with the same awful fact. They were mistaken about you. You did not need to argue. You did not need to defend yourself. You did not go on a campaign to prove anything. You just let the results of your life to speak for themselves. And that's what hurts the most, since nothing makes a louder noise than a healed, focused, and unbothered soul marching with purpose. Suddenly, the same individuals who sought to eliminate you are disturbed by your existence, not because you're yelling, but because your quiet suddenly speaks louder than their words ever did. You've become unmistakable. They may browse past your name, ignore your presence, and even pretend you're no longer important. But deep down, they feel the weight of who you've become. They anticipated their quiet to put you off. Instead, it reinforced your point. They intended to finish your narrative, but they mistakenly made you the loudest part of theirs. A number. Their absence was intended to harm you, but it really healed the areas they couldn't reach. Their departing was meant to break you. That was the whole objective, to make you feel tiny, unloved, and crushed in their absence. It wasn't just about going away. It was about making certain you felt it. But they didn't comprehend that their leaving did not ruin you. It delivered you. You weren't just abandoned. You were discharged. The emotional grip they had on you began to weaken the moment they walked away. And gradually, things began to alter, not on the exterior, but deep within. With their speech out of your mind, your own voice began to swell. You didn't hear their judgment, guilt trips, or passive hostile remarks. You were finally listening to yourself. And for the first time in a long time, your inner kid was free to breathe. The part of you that was always attempting to satisfy, impress, and prove yourself to them. That bit eventually breathed. Their absence became a cleanse, a complete system reset. Without the manipulation, gaslighting, and emotional push and pull, your nervous system started to relax. Your thoughts became calm. Your heart stopped beating as it braced for the hit. And in that peace, you rediscovered who you were before their influence twisted you. You were not insane. You were not too much. You weren't too sensitive. You were just emotionally influenced by someone who could never fully love you without seeking to dominate you. Their leaving provided the space for mending you didn't realize you needed. You began to grieve what you had lost. Yes, but more significantly, you began retrieving what was buried. Your voice, strength, and value. Their departure did not leave you empty. It left you in the clear. It's clear that you were never the issue. It was clear that they couldn't give you what you were pleading for. They did not abandon you when you needed assistance. But this is precisely what happened. What they intended to hurt you became the doorway through which heaven healed you. The door they slammed became the one that brought you back to yourself. And now you aren't furious. You are simply free. A number. They chuckled as you sat alone, not realizing you were becoming unrecognizable. They laughed. They gossiped. They joked about your quiet, seclusion, and so-called fall off. Your absence indicated that you were losing. They interpreted your silent season for weakness, failure, and evidence that they were correct to move away. They assumed that sitting alone meant you were trapped, stagnant, broken, and irrelevant. However, they had no notion that anything significant was taking place in that quiet. You weren't falling apart. You were falling into place. While they were busy amusing each other, you were developing behind the scenes. Every tear you shed was nourishing a version of yourself that they weren't ready to meet. Every day spent in stillness brought you closer to healing, development, and enlightenment. You were not waiting to be noticed. You were getting entire. They'll never be disciplined enough to perform the inner work you were doing. And the transition happened quietly, but it occurred fully. Now you walk differently. You talk differently. Your energy no longer seeks approval. It deserves respect. And the people who laughed at you can't laugh anymore because they don't recognize who you've become. The light is true, and the detail is excellent. The tranquility you carry is unshakable. And that's what scares them, because they still remember the version of you they dismissed, the one they believed they understood. And now that version is absolutely gone. In its place is someone who they cannot categorize, control, or ridicule. You outgrown the whole picture people had of you. And it occurred when they were too busy laughing to notice. They are now uneasy because your presence is significant. You don't pursue, explain, or perform. And the unfamiliarity is unsettling. Because if you've changed so much in quiet, what more can you do that people won't see? They chuckled while you sat alone, oblivious to the change taking place. And now the joke isn't funny because you've become someone they can't reach, identify, or forget. A number. Now they're racing to reconnect. However, you no longer feel the need to be understood. Now they're gradually returning, gently like your posts, sending strange messages, and testing the waters to see whether there's still room in your life for them. They notice the transition, and it bothers them not because they miss you in some profound manner, but because they can't feel your energy anymore. They can no longer read, reach, or rattle you as they once could, and the stillness they once weaponized is now strangling them. They regret it deeply. They are aware that they mismanaged you. They're aware that they mishandled something genuine. The most painful realization for them is that the version of you they previously disregarded no longer exists. You have developed. You've separated. You've healed to the point where their opinions no longer have emotional weight. And it is where your genuine power resides. Not chilly, but indifferent. They want to start up where things left off, yet they're attempting to reconnect with someone you've outgrown. You no longer need to be heard by those who are determined to misunderstand you. You no longer explain yourself to people who only listen through the lens of their own ego. And you don't need closure from individuals who didn't appreciate your presence until your absence became louder than your words ever could. You've accepted what occurred, not because it was acceptable, but because you stopped expecting it to make sense. You stopped needing to be understood. And that's when the real release occurred. That was when the doors didn't just shut. They sealed not out of rage, but because the peace you now hold does not fit in halls full of confusion. You've upped your frequency. Is different. Your standards are greater. And the circle they formerly belonged to is no longer there. You are not bitter. You are free. And they're just now discovering that the window they assumed would always be open has silently, finally, and forever closed. Peace does not demand an audience or your life. It is no longer a platform for their salvation. They assumed that isolating you would shatter you. They believed that silence would obliterate you. They assumed that cutting you off would bring you down. But every effort to belittle you demonstrated how important you actually were. Their absence did not destroy your spirit. It created room for your rebirth. Their rejection did not reduce your value. It paved the way for your disclosure. And the stillness they weaponized became the hallowed ground on which your purpose and strength grew. You're no longer the version of yourself that they rejected. You're smarter, sharper, and unabashedly aligned. They don't recognize you because they've never really seen you. They were so intent on managing your presence that they misjudged the power of your transformation. However, the shift is evident today. The eyesight is crisper. The voice is louder without yelling. The radiance is genuine and no longer subdued for their comfort. You were never designed to fit in with the crowd. You were destined to rise beyond it. And although they tried to reconnect, you're not looking back. Not out of pride, but out of alignment. You do not live for closure. You live in clarity. You do not seek validation. You carry confirmation. And you don't need their attention. You become the light. So let them regret it. Let them whisper. Let them watch. Because the focus of this narrative has shifted away from what they did. It is about what you have become as a result of it. They believed isolating you was the end, yet it was just what heaven needed to launch your becoming. And now the quiet that was supposed to shatter you is the thunder that accompanies you everywhere. If you found this message meaningful, please share it with others. Press the like button to express your support. Leave a comment below to share your tale or ideas. Your opinion matters here. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out on the amazing truths and insights that will inspire and motivate you. This video might be the breakthrough someone else needs today, so please share it with others who are ready to overcome their obstacles and step into their power. Together, we're creating a community of unstoppable, fearless fighters who refuse to be silenced or marginalized. Your participation feeds this movement. Join us and keep the thunder rolling. God bless you.